Welcome back to Leader Up, a podcast by the Army Management Staff College, where we discuss a broad range of leadership and leader development topics with an emphasis on the Army profession. In today's episode, we meet with Mr. Steve Banach, Director of the Army Management Staff College, to talk about the importance of educating a hybrid Army.
The U.S. Army is at war, and we've been at war for more than 18 years, and the nature of this war is different from other wars fought in the Army's history. And there's even a different war being fought right now as we speak. And this war is being fought in a virtual battle space and in places and ways that many Americans might not suspect. Today, the Army and our country are at a decision point where we must start looking seriously at the future of warfare. In today's episode of Leader Up, we have a special guest to talk about this war, and more specifically, how Army Management Staff College can help educate the kind of hybrid Army needed for the future. So joining us today is Mr. Steve Banach, who is the Director of Army Management Staff College. Mr. Banach, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate the opportunity to come down and talk about this important subject.
Thank you. We appreciate it also. I know our audience is anxious to hear from you. And I just want to start off with this phrase that was in the lead up to this, hybrid Army. Just tell us what a hybrid Army is.
Yeah, so a hybrid Army is a force that can win wars in both virtual battle space and in physical battle space. And we start talking about the evolution of armies, throughout the 244-year history of our Army. We see that our armies actually changed the composition of its force 3 times, and I'd say that we're at an inflection point where we've got to do it a 4th time as we've moved from the citizen soldier army that fought on Concord in 1775 to the conscript force that we had in 1973, and of course that's evolved into the all-volunteer force. As we move forward, I would offer that the form, function, logic of the current all-volunteer force has got to change, I think, significantly to deal with not only the physical battle space maneuver threats that we face, and there are some adjustments that need to be made there, but more importantly, to deal with the combined arms virtual battle space maneuver challenges that we have today. And one important comment I want to make right up front is that my comments aren't binary in nature today. We need to win wars in physical battle space, and we need to win wars in virtual battle space. We need to address what Clausewitz talked about, the ideal war, which is the ability to destroy tank armies, but we also need to address the real war, which is far more complex, deals with all the political, economic, whole of nation type conundrums that the Army has to operate in.
And so let's talk about developing this hybrid Army and how an entity like Army Management Staff College and the world of the Army civilians, what is needed to educate that population in order to become the hybrid Army of the future?
Well, our starting point is, we go back to, Cotter and Peter Singay's work. So, I'll just use, a little bit of both of their, theoretical constructs. We fundamentally have got to be able to lead change effectively and maintain personal mastery for warfare in our time. My judgment is we've lost personal mastery for warfare. 18 years of attrition warfare is the evidence. As an Army, we're seeing the ideal war. We're making the appropriate adjustments with the cross-functional teams and the technological advances. But I would offer, I think that we're not seeing and framing and naming the real war as it's opaque to most of our practitioners. And lastly, as security professionals, we get paid to see the changing topography in the global security milieu, and we're not seeing the real war that's before us today.
I want to read a quote to you by Clausewitz, who is a popular military philosopher, and this quote was attributed to him around 200 years ago, and the quote is this: "The first, the supreme, the most far-reaching act of judgment that the statesman and commander have to make is to establish by that test the kind of war on which they are embarking. And again, that quote was made about 200 years ago. And so why is that important for members of the Army Civilian Corps or the Army at large today in as we face the future?
Right. So what Clausewitz is telling us in layman's terms is we've got to understand the theory for the wars that we're in. Kinetic physical war theory will not suffice for combined arms virtual battle space maneuver requirements. We need a different set of theory, which our adversaries, quite honestly, are using, and I'll speak to some of those later on here in the podcast. But we're rightly addressing the great power competition in physical battle space. But the question is, how is the Army writ large addressing great power competition in virtual battle space? When you look at and kind of deconstruct this, there's a 4D technology space for physical war and virtual war, and I'll take the physical piece first. We understand the form and structure of our formation and of what our adversaries, tank army formations are. We understand the structure. We understand those capabilities. We understand those capabilities are constantly evolving. We've got to keep pace with them. We understand the flow of forces and the time and timing, the battlefield calculus for how many munitions and the synchronization and the convergence that we see in the MDO concept for how it is. We can bring all the forces to bear under some joint task force to destroy a tank army when we need to do that. So we understand the physical battle space maneuver requirement. What we don't understand is the 4D technology space requirements to conduct combined arms virtual battle space maneuver. And when I say that, it's the totality of technology. It's cyber, social media, augmented intelligence, and machine learning. It's autonomous systems. It's genetics. It's electronic warfare and signals intelligence, and many, many other things that have to be synthesized into principles of virtual war, all right, and virtual warfighting functions. So we've got to do the full DOTML-PF assessment on what it takes to win in a war that requires combined arms virtual battle space maneuver, which is global, 24/7 virtual fires. The entire world is battle space, all right, and it's continuous. It's not episodic as physical warfare is.
And you talked about this phrase, great power competition, and in the past 50, 100, 200 years, a great power was recognized as something either with a lot of military power or a lot of size, land mass, or some kind of status. And making something a great power today is different from that. So just what does that mean? What does being a great power in today's environment mean?
Well, I kind of think about it as I just kind of mentioned, great power competition in physical battle space. Again, I think we're well on our way there. I think we have a lot of personal mastery in that regard. But great power competition also exists in global virtual battle space. Global virtual terrain is the decisive terrain that sets the conditions for anything that we're going to ever do in virtual battle space. And what this really requires for all of us, relative to personal mastery, is adjusting our mental models. We've got to embrace different theory, different mental models, different learning modalities. How do we structure team learning across boundaries that we would never think to do before? And i.e. the corporate world. Because when you start talking about great power competition in virtual battle space, we're not just talking about nation state actors. We're talking about companies. We're talking about empowered individuals who can reach out and impact the global security environment at any point through a multitude of different munitions. So So the personal mastery, the mental model adjustments, how we structure team learning, thinking in systems. We're dealing with complex adaptive challenges that are systems of systems. We've got to understand to create a shared vision that creates the construct. When we consider warfare, and going back to Clausewitz, when we consider warfare, we're considering both the ideal war and the real war in virtual and physical battle space.
And what you're kind of talking about is another phrase that I've heard you use, and that's MDO, or multi-domain operations. And so what is multi-domain operations, and why is that important in this discussion?
Yeah, so I think it brings us to a couple of overarching kind of thoughts. First is how and this is where the Army is right now, because multi-domain operations is a set of concepts. It is not doctrine. But the thought behind it is, how should the U.S. Army reimagine how it's learning about the changing form, function, and logic for warfare in our time? And I think that's foundationally, a major part of what MDO is trying to get at. All right, and then the second piece is, how do we realize Army power? And going back to NDS 2018, how do we expand the competitive space? That's part of it. Moving from just Army, to joint in coalition warfare, which we've done forever and which we'll continue to do forever. But I would expand it even more broadly, that it's going to go beyond military boundaries, and we're going to have corporate entities helping us think about how it is we're seeing battle space. And again, the battle space is not just physical; it's virtual. Every one of us is a combatant, whether we believe it or not. Our homes, our offices, all points in between our battle space, and we've got to recognize that. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the theory behind that. But when you look at the MDO concept, it's joint force centric. You're talking about attacks, and I mentioned some of this a second ago. Electronic warfare, signals intelligence, cyber's a major component of this. So break down information operations, which I think needs to take a step forward out of the previous paradigm into a new paradigm, where you're talking about the synthesis of social media, cyber, augmented intelligence, machine learning, autonomous systems, thinking in system theory, combining that with EW and SIGINT more globally, and not just in a joint task force area, recognizing that there's strategic support areas that are global, and strategic deep fire areas. So it's the totality of the planet, which is fundamentally, changes how we bound, operations. But most of that is, as we think about it in a traditional context, we're thinking about some form of kinetic fires. The A2, the anti-access and anti-denial conundrum that we have just to get into the battle space is really, the focus, of a lot of what we're doing there in the MDO framework.
And there's some wrinkle of deception involved in this type of warfare, but it goes way beyond simple military deception that most people would be familiar with from the past. So deception is a part of this kind of warfare.
Well, there's no doubt, and I've got a problem frame threat, IPB, a construct that I talk about, and I bound it, in a threat horizon from about 1940, up to the present. So, for all intent and purposes, 80 years. It includes nation states like Russia and China, but also other non-nation state actors that play a role in how we assess threats to our country. So when you start thinking about this notion of deception, I think we've got to totally reframe it, because when you start looking at the form, function, logical warfare for our time, and you look at the enemy threat lines of effort, and this is how putting the threat hat on. This is how I would look at it. My first line of effort is control the perception of the truth. The first casualty of all wars is the truth. So our adversaries, and again, we kind of have a tendency to mirror image that other people think like we do when that's not the case. Our adversaries don't have the resources we have. They don't have $760 billion that they can put into their national defense. So they take the indirect approach, the Sun Tzu Liddell Hart approach. But I would say it's more insidious. It's a much different approach. And so I'll focus on controlling the perception of the truth. The multitude of threats understand how we learn. They understand our systems. They understand our decision cycles and how we communicate. All right. So that's the first line of effort. The goal is to reinforce line of effort number 2, which is this notion of social creation, where they become technologically and societally entangled with us. Okay. And that allows them to pursue, the relational dialectics theory. And I'm going to start kind of pulling the thread on some of the different theory that we need to focus on. I already mentioned, systems learning, decision making, and communication theory that we need to, probe deeper into, and we should teach at the Army Management Staff College and within PME. But the social creation line of effort speaks to technological and societal entanglement and this notion of relational dialectics. And when I talk about relational dialectics, I'm talking about, driving wedges into different pieces of our segments of our population. Examples: the rich and the poor, gender wedges, race, wedges, wedges between our political party, in religion, and there's a multitude of things that our threats are doing to us from a relational dialectic standpoint to create division. All right, and that leads into semiotic exploitation, which is the exploitation of the signs and symbols in our culture. So you start thinking about some of the signs and symbols that are important to us. The exploiting of the Constitution, it's no longer valid. The Bible versus the Quran is another example. The Statue of Liberty versus the Confederate soldier statues. So all of this, when you look at the technological, societal entanglement, the relational dialectics, the driving of the wedges, exploiting our signs and symbols is meant to create a state of liminality within a culture. And the liminality is a state of disequilibrium. Nobody knows what's true anymore. And they lose their handrails. All right. And they do this through 4D technology space. There's this, I would call it pure anarchy relative to the technology structure, which is constantly changing. The capabilities are constantly changing. The flow of technology is totally unconstrained, and nobody has a sense of timing. We only learn about the technology in many cases as it has emerged, from this embryonic state that until it impacts us in some way, and then we grasp how to use it. So the fourth line of effort is the governance. Okay, so what you have and what has been established. And myself and Colonel Dave Pendle, we wrote a persistent surveillance paper back in 2004, right, that captures a lot of these concepts. So the first concept that our threats absolutely treat as a fact, not an assumption, is that they will have a population that has assured connectivity. That is, they can access their threat population. They can have established persistent surveillance on a population through assured connectivity. Okay? So assured connectivity, persistent surveillance. It leads to financial and economic exploitation, medical record exploitation, personal identity exploitation. And we've seen this with the OPM hacks and the countless hacks of various government systems. Those three elements lead to social control of populations and eventually virtual colonization. And that's where we're going. And when you combine, the control of perception of the truth, social creation, controlling 4D technology space and governance, that's what I'm talking about when I'm, in terms of enemy lines of effort towards combined arms, virtual battle space maneuver, which is global. It's so much bigger than physical warfare.
And when you talk about assured connectivity, that means that an enemy who's trying to have some kind of an attack, that they can make the assumption that people that they're attacking have connectivity in some way. I've got my iPhone on all the time. I go home and check my computer. I'm logging into my bank. I'm giving them an in into my life or the things that are important to me. Is that what assured?
Yeah. So assured connectivity leads right to persistent surveillance, which leads to the economic, financial, medical exploitation, which then leads to social control and then virtual colonization. Absolutely right. And so you have four threat lines of effort. There's a multitude of theory, and there's probably about 16 or 17 different theoretical concepts that we're not teaching anywhere in CES, the civilian education system, or in the professional military education system.
And so what will the response of Army Management Staff College be? What is it now? What will it be? What should it be in the short-term, long-term future to, as we said in the beginning, to educate a hybrid Army to deal with these threats that are coming? Right.
So let's kind of deconstruct what we're doing right now and kind of look at the Army we have right now from a CES and a civilian education system and a professional military education system. So the foundation, and there's a huge difference between training and education, but the foundation for our United States Army is training. We have a training ethos, training structure, and that's how we align ourselves. When the training model is fundamentally, I'm going to dip into learning theory here, is fundamentally about single loop learning. We have a task, a condition, and a set of standards that have to be met. And again, this is not a binary discussion here. This is really important. We got to do it right. We've got to achieve efficiencies, all positives. Okay, we got to do this right. But the challenge you have when you start talking about single loop learning, these task, condition, standards is focused on doing things right. It keeps you in the same paradigm despite what's going on outside in the much larger ecosystem that's going on in the world. So you can potentially become a single loop learning entity in a triple loop learning world, which could lead to 18 years of attrition warfare. The next step on all this is in the way that we help ourselves is moving beyond a purely training paradigm into rigor in the educational realm, where you start creating double loop learning potential. All right, that is to say, we're really examining a multitude of theory where we understand that we have to do the right things in the existing paradigm, all right, to be able to change direction in the existing paradigm. So when we talk about single loop learning and double loop learning, we're talking about operating in the same paradigm, doing things right, and then doing the right things, and then changing direction in the existing paradigm. The third and the most important element in this learning theory that I'm talking about is this notion of triple loop learning, where we create new governing principles and produce a different paradigm. And that's what we've got to do. That's part of the challenge for the Army Management Staff College, is to develop the curriculum to teach the right theory to move us from the single and double loop learning paradigm that we find ourselves in today, which is primarily oriented on how the Army runs and fighting large scale combat operations in physical battle space. Again, not binary. We got to do that. It's absolutely essential. But we're missing this other piece. We haven't created the new governing principles for how to address the real war with these triple loop learning mechanisms that we need to embrace.
And to get to a triple loop learning, that's going to go way beyond just adding a couple of new lessons here and there. You're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, a comprehensive relook of even the role of the Army civilian within the Army profession. Is that your vision?
Yeah, absolutely. And none of us knows what that's going to look like. We've got a number of documents that tell us that we've got to be MDO capable in 2028, MDO ready in 2035. I already mentioned NDS 2018 about expanding the competitive space. I'm talking about expanding the cognitive competitive space. All right, to do that, you've got to have diversity in the instructors that you're using. All right, I'm talking about accessing, the civilian work environment, civilian talent pool. Bring people in that understand the theory and can address the theoretical gaps that we have in the civilian education system and the professional military education system that our uniformed service members use.
Okay, well, Mr. Banach, I want to ask you one more question, and just your opportunity to address anything about this topic that I wasn't able to ask you? Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is important for our audience to hear?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about a couple of things that I think is really important. When you mentioned the Army Management Staff College and what's the educational vision? Well, the first thing in addition to what it is that we've already discussed, the first thing that we need to do is to teach the right operating systems. And when I say that, Singh published a book in 2014 called Accelerate that addressed operating system 1, a process operating system, and operating system 2, more of a systems-based systems. We did the same thing when I was the STAMPS director from 2007 to 10. We talked about the integration of broad conceptual planning with detailed planning. So detailed planning being operating system 1 process, and design methodology being the broad systems, asynchronous body of methods. But that in itself is insufficient. So operating system 1 process, operating system 2, the broad methodological approach, the design approach, has got to be joined with what I call a big data operating system, or it's eventually going to be a quantum operating system. But it's going to include all the elements of cyber, social media, autonomous systems, big data, systems thinking, and genetics, and all the other. And again, it's the full array of the 4D technology space that impacts virtual battle space. So the educational vision has fundamentally got to change to create the hybrid army that we need, the army that can win in virtual and physical battle space. And it starts, the foundation is in these educational operating systems, not training, but educational operating system. Operating system 3, big data. Operating system 2, the design methodological approach. And operating system number 1, the processes. And they're constantly reinforcing, and they never stop in their evolution. I would also just would like to close with a couple comments. What I think is opaque to many is the shift in problem typology. All right, so we've moved in part from this problem typology, this technical problem of destroying the tank army, to a complex adaptive set of problems where you're dealing with hybrid war that deals with cyber, social media, all the other things I mentioned, but nanotechnologies, eventually genetic engineering, asymmetric ethics. When I say asymmetric ethics, I'm talking about what activity in virtual battle space eclipses your zones of acceptability and limits of tolerance, where you have to take direct action in physical battle space. We're dealing with global weapons of mass deception. We're seeing virtual colonization and social control everywhere. It's just placing a tremendous burden on the industrial age systems that we've relied on so many times, and that's a function of a collapse of many of the industrial age archetypes that we used. When you look back, to the end of the 1930s, 1940s. And you looked at walk it forward into the 50s. The lifespan of a Fortune 500 company was 60 years. And today, we're under 20 years, and we got about 12%. You got about 60 of those companies that are still surviving, and a couple of those are in precarious positions and may in fact go away. Soldiers aren't the only combatants anywhere. From 9/11 forward, most of the warfare in the world has been conducted by civilians, either by way of terrorism and terrorist organizations, or in virtual battle space by civilians who are hacking and attacking other people nonstop. And so we just don't have physical war anymore. You have virtual war, virtual organizations, personal identities constantly being attacked. With ISIS, you saw the rise of virtual nation states, and all of this is bound by this this construct of 18 years of attrition warfare. So my last parting comment here on hybrid warfare and what our adversaries are doing to us, I mean, they are very skilled at developing and introducing hybrid warfare campaigns that keep the elites in a civilization in crisis, and the rich, those that are in government, the billionaire class and others, they keep that audience in crisis, while the average human being goes into work avoidance, is not really sure who to trust. And what our adversaries are really, really effective at doing is controlling, the decisive virtual terrain. They're controlling our productive range of learning, and they're denying that. That's the key terrain. They're denying the productive range of learning for our society, and so all the societies around the world. It doesn't matter. I mean, everybody's got a role in this, so I think that's what we see happening to us. We've got to develop the courseware. We're trying to do that with an information age business transformation continuing education senior leader course. We're trying to do that that's a 1-week course. We're trying to do it with a 2-week information dominance course here at the Army Management Staff College that helps us generate, as Nason Talib talked about, how do we create in this multispectral environment, anti-fragile capabilities? How do we address asymmetric ethics? Autonomous leadership and autonomous decision making is coming faster than we can imagine. Concepts like synthetic soldier immunity, where our soldiers are in a multispectral battle space. How do we give them the baseline innate immunity, the adaptive immunity, and the borrowed immunity, kind of like our biological systems have, all right, to protect them in this multispectral threat combat situation we find ourselves in. So we educate for uncertainty, as General Schumacher used to say. To deal with complex adaptive problems, we train for certainty, and both are absolutely required. And we intend to do that here at the Army Management Staff College.
Well, Mr. Steve Banach, I want to thank you for your time. Number one, for participating in our podcast. Number two, for the efforts that you've been undertaking since you've been the director to kind of reset and refocus not only our organization, but the Army Civilian Corps as a whole. And what's that old saying, may you live in interesting times? And based on this conversation, I believe we do. And I'm looking forward to the future. And so thank you, Mr. Steve Banach, for coming down here and giving us your time today.
Thank you, Dave. It's an honor to serve.
If you have any questions about today's episode or this podcast, please check out the description for our email or for our website. Thanks for listening.